Hey friends, it's Sarah, and today I want to recommend about a dozen nonfiction books that I read this year and really enjoyed. So I read a lot of fiction, and a lot of books that get talked about on BookTube are fiction books, whether they're YA or romance or literary fiction. And I think that nonfiction books can seem a little unapproachable at times. You know, there's those ones that probably your dad reads, they're war stories, they're like 1,000 pages long, the writing is tiny, the pages are like Bible thin, and they're terrifying. But I think that a really well-written nonfiction can be just as engaging as a fiction story, and so I want to share some with you that I found really interesting, that taught me stuff, but that also kept me engaged and interested in the same way that a fiction story takes you along the narrative. So without further ado, and in no particular order, here are some recommendations for you. First up, I have Addressing the Resistance by Camille Benda. This book I've recommended before in my Met Gala video, but it's basically, it feels like a museum curated collection almost. It's got all these like pictures, and it talks about how different movements use fashion in different ways to help aid their cause. So anything from like the suffragettes wearing outfits made out of like newspaper articles talking about women's voting rights, to the Black Panthers dressing in that very iconic, you know, the all black, the berets, kind of militant look, even to the other side with like the neo-Nazis when they had that rally where they're all dressed in like the polos and the khaki shorts and the tiki torches. So it's a really interesting delve into like how fashion is actually super important for a cause and how that can be used to manipulate the public's view of a certain group or social movement. It feels a little like that scene in The Devil Wears Prada where Miranda Priestly is like, you think fashion doesn't apply to you, and goes on that long tangent. So yeah, this was a 4-star read for me. It's got lots of pictures, and it feels, like I said before, like walking through a museum exhibit. It's done really well, it's very engaging, and I feel like I learned a lot while reading it. Next up, I have Pride by Tate with LGSM. So this is a true story behind the movie Pride, and this is like the movie cover on it here. But this was written after the movie came out, and it's the true story behind that. So basically, the movie and this book talks about a group of lesbians and gay men who went out to South Wales to support the striking miners, and in London, like, they collected money for them. They held benefit events to feed and clothe and keep the lights on for these miners who were on strike during the era of Margaret Thatcher. So this is told in a kind of like oral history style. It is mostly interviews with the miners as well as LGSM, Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, the group that the movie and book follows. And so it is told mostly in kind of like dialogue a little bit. So it's got, you know, like the name and then like their text. Tate does provide like historical context, kind of acts as an editor and adds in like extra information to put the quotes into context. I learned a lot in this. I love the movie. It's my favorite movie of all time. If you haven't watched it, it's incredible. It's heartwarming. It's funny. It's just a chef's kiss of a movie. But this really talks a lot about like the historical context, about what actually happened. And a lot of it is true, or like very close to the truth in the movie. But I think this one really like hits home how bad Margaret Thatcher was and the kind of policies that she would put in place. And being Canadian, like, I sort of like had a vague idea about Margaret Thatcher and like kind of who she was, and I knew she was disliked, but reading this and like reading about the specific policies that she was implementing just made me like so angry, and I was so heartbroken for these poor people, both sides of it, who are being attacked by Margaret Thatcher. But it was also really heartwarming because they came together. They had this common enemy that actually ended up kind of bringing them together in a way that they might not have before, and that was really lovely and made me believe in humanity again. Like the book says, the story of LGSM and the relationship built between the vibrant young gay men and women of London and the beleaguered villages of the South Wales coalfield is not simply a heartwarming story or an oddity from history. It is, in these fractured times especially, a vital reminder of how common cause may always be found if only we break down the barricades of prejudice. It's lovely. I highly recommend it, especially if you've loved the movie. this just like adds so much more depth to it as well, and it's just really fascinating. And I gave this one like 4.5 stars. Up next, I want to recommend Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe. This was a 5-star read for me. This was a recommendation from my friend Anna. I've talked about it in a couple of videos before, but oh my god. This is a book that will make you want to scream and like rip people's faces off with your bare hands. It follows the Sackler family, who are this like super rich, super influential family who are in the drug business. So the first generation, Arthur Sackler, who's kind of like the head of the family, was one of, if not the first person to do like medical marketing, and was responsible for helping make drugs like Valium super huge. Trickling down to today, the Sackler family are also the ones who produced OxyContin and basically helped kickstart the opioid crisis, which is horrifying. But this book follows the generations of the Sackler family, how they've had this influence on like the market for pharmaceutical drugs, the impact that's had on society at large, as well as their kind of like philanthropic ventures and the ways that they, you know, you donate some money and it helps you get a tax break, and then also your name's on like an art thing and a university, so you can't be bad because you're helping fund the arts and education. And it just makes you want to scream and like destroy capitalism. But it's so well done, it's fascinating. Again, I learned so much, and it made me so mad. I was like, wanted to throw this book across the room, not because the book was bad, but because the people that it covered were so heinous and have such a disregard for other human lives and the ways they would just like conceal any data that would show their products were dangerous. They would knowingly sell these things even though the side effects were awful. They would blatantly lie and say they were not prone to causing addiction. Oh, it makes me so mad. But I really loved it. It was so well done, and Patrick Radden Keefe has written a couple other nonfiction books before. I haven't read them, but I think I might now because I really enjoyed his writing style. Up next, I have Truth Telling by Michelle Good. I've talked about this book in my Indigenous Reads video, so if you want like a more in-depth review, you can go check that out, and I will link it in the description and up in the air. But this is a collection of essays by Michelle Good about Indigenous life in Canada. It talks about residential schools, it talks about the 60s scoop, it talks about the land back movement, about Indigenous art and literature, and it's just like a really good kind of one step beyond a primer for Indigenous issues in Canada. Michelle Good is also just an excellent writer, so it's very compelling, and it makes you want to cry and scream again because of all of the injustices that Indigenous people have faced in the past and are still continuing to face today. So if you're looking to educate yourself on Indigenous issues in Canada, I would highly recommend this one. I think it's a great starting point, and it's also very like accessible, easy to read. This was a 4.5-star read for me. Up next, I want to recommend On Animals by Susan Orlean. This one is a bit of a lighter one. It's again another collection of essays, all written by Susan Orlean, who wrote one of my favorite books, the library book, but she worked as a journalist for several decades, and this is a collection of essays all centered around animals. So some of them are something crazy like a woman who owned 23 pet tigers that no one knew about, or a little girl who takes part in like homing pigeon racing, which is wild. But then also stories from Susan's own life of like raising chickens and kind of like starting her own little acreage, what that is like. And they're just really like heartwarming, and they really delve deep into the relationships between humans and animals. And I finished reading them and I was like, I have to go cuddle my cats. I love them so much. I have to go like hold them close to me even as they struggle to get free. But it's just, if you're an animal lover, it's really a great book to read. And even if you're not a particular animal person, I just think the stories are really fascinating. She explores all these different like aspects of society, these kind of like niche little groups, like the homing pigeon racers, crazy, that like you never hear about, that you wouldn't know about, but they're just so interesting. It's as much about the people who love the animals as it is about the animals themselves, and it was a 4-star read for me. Going back into the darker side of nonfiction, I want to recommend The Escape Artist by Jonathan Freedland. This is a story about a man called Rudolf Verba, who was the first Jewish person to escape from Auschwitz, and he did so in order to try and warn the world about what was actually happening in Auschwitz, because he believed that if the world knew the atrocities that the Jewish people were facing in these concentration camps, they would take a much harder stance and would try and protect the Jewish people a lot more strongly than they were. And so it's a little bit of this kind of like thrilling escape book, but then it's also talking about the kind of like wider politics going on regarding the Jewish people who are being rounded up and sent to these concentration camps, and like one man's struggle and belief in kind of the goodness of humans, and like if they really know what's happening, then like they would stop it. It's a pretty tough read, as most Holocaust stories are. It's very brutal and heartbreaking, but it really showcases Rudolph's courageousness and like tenacity and determination to try and save his fellow Jews and to stop all of the genocide and torture. And it was really good. It was very, I would say, like fast-paced. It like moves along at a pretty quick clip. It reads a little bit like fiction, where there's like always a lot happening, and it just really makes you care for our main man, Rudolph. You're just rooting for him the whole time, and it was excellent. It was 5 stars. The next one I want to recommend is also a Holocaust book, and this is Mouse by Art Spiegelman. So this is a graphic memoir. I'm not sure if it's 100% nonfiction. I think there's a little bit of play there, but it's basically the story of Art Spiegelman's father, Vladek, who again was a survivor of the concentration camps. So he's telling his story of survival to his son Art, but it also covers kind of their relationship. So the way it's drawn is it'll be drawn with like, you know, them, like Art Spiegelman going over to his father's house and them like talking, and then it'll be like a chapter of his father's story of surviving Auschwitz, of surviving the concentration camps. So you see the effects that the concentration camps had on Vladek, and the ones that have been kind of passed down to Art, and the way that like his father's behavior affects him, and the behaviors stem from his experience during the Holocaust. And it's incredibly moving. It's very dark. The Jews are portrayed as mice. The Nazis are portrayed as cats. And so it's this interesting allegory of these animals representing the different groups in the book. And it's a classic. It's a classic for a reason. I waited way too long to read this one, and I can't stop recommending it because it's so impactful, and it's such a beautiful and hard story of, you know, a son seeking to understand his father, and his father seeking to escape his past. It was 5 stars. Again, it was just so beautiful, and it made me tear up just a little bit. Back to something a little bit lighter again, I want to recommend The First 10 Years by Meg Bashwiner and Joseph Fink. This was a 4-star read for me, and this actually follows one of the co-creators of Welcome to Night Vale, the podcast, which is incredible. If you haven't listened to it, what are you doing with your life? It's so bizarre and so funny, and I love it so much. Anyways, so that's Joseph, and then his wife, Meg Bashwiner, who also works on Welcome to Night Vale, but it chronicles their 10-year relationship from both of their points of view. So it goes year by year, and they each write kind of a little, almost essay, like a little story about that year of what they remember from it. And sometimes they tell the same story from their 2 different points of view, which is kind of funny. You see, like, the details don't always quite match up. But then sometimes they remember completely different things from the same year. And so you have kind of a broader overview of that year. It's funny, it's sweet, and it's a real intimate, like, deep dive into a relationship and what it's like to be in a relationship. And I think it's just really lovely. It makes you feel really good about love, and it's not like everything is fine and perfect. It talks about like the hard times they've been through, the different things they've had to do to like support each other, the things they've had to overcome together, but it really makes you like believe in love, and it really makes you be like, oh, Relationships are amazing. Love is so good in a really realistic way that's not like watching a rom-com. Then I wanted to recommend Becoming a Matriarch by Helen Knott. I've also talked about this one in my Indigenous Reads video, but this was another 5-star book for me. I got an ARC from Alfred Knopf, Canada, so thank you to the publisher. But it was just like jaw-dropping. I really love Helen Knott's writing. It's a memoir about her kind of trying to find her role in her family. She loses her mom and her grandmother in the span of 6 months, and so she's kind of like the matriarch of the family, and she's Indigenous, and so she's trying to kind of grapple with her loss, and then like, what does it mean to be a matriarch in her culture? And is there a way to kind of create her own space of being like a matriarch in a non-traditional way and trying to set boundaries? And even though it does focus a lot on obviously her Indigenous background and that culture and community, it is a wider look at grief and loss and finding a place within your family and setting boundaries even against like those you love, because you gotta protect yourself and you can't be everything for everyone. But also, you know, not just like filling a role that's there, but making it your own and finding out what the people you love actually need and want from you. This was beautiful. Her writing is incredible, and I just cannot recommend Helen Knott's stuff enough. She is an incredible writer. She's always very vulnerable and takes you into like the real nitty-gritty, intimate moments of her life with such grace and dignity, and I just love her stuff so much. Please go read this. It's so beautiful. Okay, my last little section here are actually audiobooks that I listened to. So the first one was Spare by Prince Harry. I know, everyone was talking about it. It was like the most hyped thing ever. And I was like, FOMO, I gotta listen to it. I had the physical book, but I ended up listening to an audiobook from Libby, and I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was pretty good. I think I'm more predisposed to being on Prince Harry's side than the rest of the royal family. So I think if you're not already feeling that way, like if you're on the side of the royal family, you might not like this as much. But I think it was a very intimate look at what it's like to grow up royal, but also what it's like to grow up as the spare. So you're like, you're kind of there. You're not like the important main one, but like you're still kind of going through all this weirdness of life. I think the best parts in this book were the parts where he talks about his mom. You can tell how much he loved her and still loves her even though she's dead. The heartbreak he felt on her death. The thing that really got me was how he was in denial after she had died. He kind of convinced himself that she had run away from the paparazzi and like kind of joined witness protection sort of, and managed to like hide away from the world the way that she always wanted to. And he wasn't able to cope with the fact that she had actually died. So that was incredibly heartbreaking for me. And then there's like some funny parts, but my other favorite part of it is how he talks about his wife, Meghan Markle, just the love that he feels for her. He talks about her in such like a romantic way, but it's still realistic. It's not like she's the most perfect person ever, but you can tell he really loves and cares for her and feels protective over her, especially considering the backlash that she faced from the British tabloids. And I don't know, I think it really humanized him, even though some of the stories were like pretty ridiculous and like no one else can relate to this. And I do think having listened to it as an audiobook helped me enjoy it a lot more. I'm not sure how I would have felt if I just read the physical book. I think having Prince Harry read his story to me really made me connect with it more. But I really enjoyed it. Like, it's probably not for everyone. And if you really hate all the royals, then like you're probably not going to enjoy this. But I think that they did a really good job humanizing him, and good job, Harry and your ghostwriter. Then I want to recommend Finding Me by Viola Davis. This one was a 4.5 star read for me. I also listened to the audiobook. Viola Davis narrates the audiobook. It's what got her EGOT, and like, yeah, I see it. She has an incredible like just voice. Like, to listen to her is wonderful, but she also, you know, she's a performer and she performs this audiobook. It's so well done. I really knew nothing about Viola Davis's past. I've only like seen her in movies and on How to Get Away with Murder, and I was like, yeah, she's a great actress. But following her life story is so incredible. she has been through so much. She's been through some like really, really hard times, and I was kind of just like jaw on the floor for half of this book with some of the things that she's had to go through and how she's managed to make it to where she is today. But yeah, I think she tells her story with such grace. It's so unflinching. She is like fully honest, kind of bears it all, very vulnerable, and I really appreciate that about it, and I think she's such an inspiration. She deserves all the things. She deserves every award she's ever gotten, and she's worked for it, and I'm so in awe of her, and I have a newfound appreciation for her, not only as a performer, but also as a person. So, would highly recommend this one. The last book that I have to recommend to you is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I have read this previously, and I'm pretty sure I've talked about it at some point on this channel in another video, maybe actually in my last nonfiction video. But I reread this in the form of an audiobook this year, and just got another layer of appreciation for it. This is a review of the human experience. So it's a series of little essays where John Green reviews different aspects of human life on a 5-star scale, similar to a Yelp review. But within that is a memoir. It talks about his life, different things he's gone through, being a chaplain, going to like an all-boys boarding school, and that's all like woven through these reviews of things like Diet Dr. Pepper and Canada Geese. And it's so beautiful. I'm probably a little biased because I've been a John Green fan for a long time, like 10 plus years. I'm a nerd fighter. I watch the Vlogbrothers all the time. I listen to their podcast. I'm in deep, y'all. But I think this is so beautiful. I really love the way that John Green looks at the world and like sees and thinks about things, both him and Hank. Like, I think they have a really good worldview that I really admire. And listening to this on audiobook was also incredible. It started out as a podcast, so I do love listening to those podcast episodes, but hearing it all as a book is also amazing, and I just kind of want it like fed into my brain 24/7. But I finished listening to this book and then immediately was like, I should reread the physical book because there's more now that I like appreciate and want to like read physically. So I think I could probably just consume this book in its various forms over and over and get new things out of it all the time. I love this book so much that I find it hard to talk about. This is a like 5-star read by far, like blows it out of the water. I think hearing John narrate this, especially the chapter where he talks about being a chaplain in a children's hospital, is very moving, and like hearing him say it, and he gets a little like not quite choked up, but like you can really hear the emotion in his voice. That really got me, and like even just now, like just thinking about that story makes me want to cry a little bit. It's so moving. I think this is John Green's best work. I really love his novels as well, but I think this is his best work so far. And it's so personal and intimate. I keep saying intimate in this video, but I think that's the best nonfiction, is something that really puts you in a real person's shoes, that really gets inside of someone and like bears kind of their guts. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about this other than I love it so much. And having talked about it, I now really want to go and listen to the audiobook again, or the podcast, or even just reread this and tab it some more, because I don't think there are enough tabs in here for how much I really love this book. Yeah, I gotta stop talking about it before I get into like not normal levels of excitement about it. So those are all of the nonfiction books that I have to recommend to you from the past year of reading. There are other ones that I've talked about in other videos that were also great, but these are kind of my standouts of the year that I think you would really enjoy. I think there's a little something for everyone. There's memoirs, there's history, and there's like the lighter stuff as well. Hopefully there's something in here that you think you would enjoy. Let me know if you've read any of them, or if you haven't, what's your favorite nonfiction book? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Now go read a book. Anti-capitalism! Everyone's favorite. Damn, girl, this real rough. That's a terrible thing to say. Oh no. 5 stars, John Green. You do you, baby. You keep doing what you're doing. I love it. I feel like it shouldn't, I don't know how I've organized these. I haven't really. But